All right, everyone, so today we're going to learn how to read a nutrition label. This is super important because if you can't read a nutrition label, how do you know what you're eating, right? So it's pretty straightforward. We're going to be looking at a nutrition label from a Colorado potato. So first thing we have to focus on, okay, is the serving information. That's generally located at the very top of your nutrition label. The first thing you want to look at is how many servings you have in the container, for instance. Now with the potato, one potato is all you got, right? But if, let's say you had a box of granola bars or anything that's a container containing more than one item, that information is going to be listed right above where it says serving size. So it would say something like 6 servings per container. It'll give you some indication of how many servings are actually in that container. Pretty straightforward. The second thing you want to focus on when we're looking at serving information is the serving size, which is going to be right here at the top. Now this is super important because if you've got something that, let's say, isn't prepackaged and the serving sizes aren't immediately obvious, then we're really going to want to know this because it'd be very easy to get a portion that's way too big, right? But for the potato, it's pretty straightforward. Its serving size is 1 potato, and that is measured in some sort of metric. They have 2 metrics here. 1 potato equals 148 grams, or it is 5.2 ounces. Now, if you had, let's say, a lasagna, right, that wasn't pre-cut, and maybe it said 8 servings per container. Well, we want to know how big those servings were, right? Because if it's not pre-cut and they're assuming there's 8 servings in that lasagna, we need to know how big that serving is. And so that would be located right here in the serving size, and it would probably have some metric associated with the serving size. The second item that we need to focus on in our nutrition label is the calories. Now remember, we're making our food decisions based on our total daily energy expenditure requirements and on our macros. These are very easy things to remember, and I've found in my experience with my clients and in my own life that they're 2 easy things to stick to, and that's super important. So for 1 Colorado potato, we've got 110 calories. Very straightforward. Now, if this was an example where I had 8 servings per package, this would be very important to know because sometimes I get hungry and I want to eat more than 1 serving, right? So I have to understand that if I'm going to eat more than 1 serving, this number is going to double, triple, however many servings you eat, that's how much this number is going to go up. So let's say I'm going to eat 2 potatoes today instead of 1. This number now becomes 110 plus 110, which equals 220 calories. Pretty straightforward, right? Now the third area of focus is a little bit more comprehensive and it's a little bit more deep. And these are the nutrients here. This entire thing is filled with a list of nutrients. Now we've got our macronutrients, we got fats, we got carbohydrates, and we've got proteins. So we know what those are. We've done a couple of videos on those by now. And so those are obviously something that we're going to be paying a lot of attention to because we want to stick within our range. But something that we haven't really focused on up until this point are the micronutrients. And those are things like calcium, iron, potassium, all of these things that are located at the bottom of the nutrition label, and also these other nutrients here that are located underneath the macronutrient categories. So let's go back up to the top and look at the different types of fat that are located in our potato. Number 1, total fat is 0 grams. So we got no fat in a potato. However, they also list the saturated fat and the trans fat content. These are 2 things that we want to focus on. Now, trans fats, they don't help you at all. Saturated fats, we want to make sure that we're not consuming a ton of saturated fat, like we're not eating red meat every single day of our life. But saturated fats, they're not inherently bad. We just want to monitor how many we're eating. And we'll get more specific into these later on down the road. Moving on, then we've got cholesterol, sodium. We want to make sure that we focus on our sodium intake here. Sodium is something that is a necessary micronutrient for your body, salt, but most people eat a lot of salt and they don't necessarily need it because they're not sweating all the time. Now here in Louisiana, it's a lot more easy to sweat because it's so hot, but just monitor your salt intake. If you're not an athlete or if you're not training 5-6 days a week and sweating profusely all the time, you don't need to eat a ton of salt. Next one, we got carbohydrates. Carbohydrates that are found in a potato are 26 grams of carbohydrates. So definitely a potato is a good source of carbohydrate. You're gonna get a lot of carbohydrates in a potato. Underneath the carbs, we've got our dietary fiber and our total sugars. Now, just a note on the sugar. Sugars are something that is very common in all foods, right? But not all sugars are created equal. For example, if you eat a banana, there's going to be fructose in that. That's sugar, right? But it's natural sugar. You don't need to fear natural sugar. Everything in balance, but eating a banana is not going to make you overweight. What will help to make you overweight are these things called added sugars. These are sugars that are added during the processing process. These are things that are not natural most of the time, but also things to help really sweeten up the food that we're eating. So in the case of a potato, since a potato is natural, there is no added sugars, right? But we do have 1 gram of sugar. That's because there's natural sugars in a potato. Again, not a bad thing. Just want to make sure that we're monitoring our sugar intake, especially when it comes to the added sugars. So we also want to make sure, just as a general principle, that when we're choosing our foods, we want to choose nutrient-dense options. Nutrient-dense options are a great choice. The rule of thumb that I like to use in my own life, and I always tell my clients when we're trying to figure out what a nutrient-dense food is basically if we can stick to something that we can identify with just our eyes, that's most likely going to be a nutrient-dense food. Examples of that: potato, banana, apple, anything that is easily identifiable typically has got some good nutrient density to it. We want to make sure that, as I said earlier, that we just focus on eating a little bit less of those added sugars. Now, I don't believe that if you deprive yourself of all added sugars, that you're necessarily going to be the happiest person, right? We want to make sure that we're balancing out our food choices, okay? And of course, we want to stick to the plan. And I've again found that when people deprive themselves of all sugars, they just don't stick to the plan. So let's just keep an eye on the added sugars and let's remove them when we can, and let's enjoy them every now and then. And lastly, we want to try to make sure that we focus on eating a little bit more of these micronutrients down here. Examples of that are vitamin D, dietary fiber, calcium, potassium, vitamin C, vitamin B, etc. Now, calcium, potassium, and magnesium are 3 micronutrients that are also considered electrolytes, and we don't get enough of those generally in our typical American diet. And the 4th thing that we want to focus on in our nutrition label is the daily value percentage. Now, this refers to the amount of nutrients that you should consume or to the amount that you should not exceed in a 24-hour period. And you'll find this if you just go all the way to the right of your nutrition label. It'll have these percentages here. Now again, this is going to be specific to each line item. So for total fat, there's 0 grams, so clearly that's 0% of our daily value. Now the carbohydrates, this is 26 grams, so that's 9% of your daily value. The example that they use on this particular nutrition label and most nutrition labels of a total daily energy expenditure is the example of a person that needs 2,000 calories. So they use general formulas to come to these percentages, but just to keep things simple, most people fall fairly close to that total daily energy expenditure, and we can use these as just a general number to kind of help us understand where we're at. Now, what is considered high and what is considered low as far as these percentages are concerned? Well, anything that's around 5% or lower is low. Anything that's 20% and above is considered high. So as far as a potato is concerned, if we look down here at vitamin C, it's actually high in vitamin C because it's 30% of your daily value in one potato. If we look over here at our dietary fiber, it's 7% in one potato. So it's somewhat low in dietary fiber. But if you eat 2 potatoes, now you've consumed 14% of your dietary fiber and then 60% of your daily value of vitamin C. I hope this helps y'all out there decode a nutrition label. Make sure that you read the articles that's associated with your homework, and it's really going to benefit you that much more.